All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into this episode. Today, we have Russell Robinson, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish National Fund USA. Russell, thank you so much for your time today.
Joseph, thank you very much for having me on.
All right. So we have a lot to cover, but before we do, I'd love to hear JNF, Jewish National Fund USA. What is the mission of your organization?
So Jewish National Fund is a 127-year-old organization that was established to repurchase the land of Israel. And today it's about building and creating a partnership with the people of Israel, developing its land, and for projects for all the people of the land of Israel.
All right. We'll get into the details in the history, but before we do, why you? Why is this organization an organization that you have built and grown to become CEO of? What's keeping you there?
So keep me there is what brought me here. I had been in private industry, been in nonprofit, was going back to private industry, and when the job for chief executive officer came up, I will tell you I didn't apply, but the person who was the head was president was Ronald Lauder from Estee Lauder, and he asked me for some advice. So I figured, okay, I'm more than happy to meet somebody like that anyway. And in the meeting, I met a billionaire who was concerned about bringing people along in organized life, and in Jewish life in this case, but I use it in organization. Very few organizations have billionaires as the head of them because it's so easy to be, you're running your own foundation, and Ronald Lauder runs his own foundation. And at that point, he can make a decision, we're going to turn 2 steps to the right, 3 steps to the left, and that's what we're going to do. The democracy sort of not there. And I don't mean that in a bad way. There's a lot of foundations, they do great work. But he was here trying to bring people along. And I think the greatest thing about philanthropy is not just giving, but how are you going to bring people along with you and how can they participate? And he was talking about a water catastrophe that was facing Israel. I told him, I know water comes from the faucet. And he said, that's kind of what I know, but we have a catastrophe. We got to learn and we got to take the risk and find solutions. And we were able to literally took a water catastrophe that faced the Middle East and turn it around. And today, Israel reuses 90% of its water. The number one country in the world. The number 2 is Spain at like 28%. That comes from somebody who knew water came from the faucet, but you were able to bring people together, challenge sophisticated philanthropy. And I think I bring to the job something that nonprofits always need to have is a business acumen. You are allowed to fail, but you're not allowed to not to plan. And one of the great things that nonprofits can do is they can risk. But you got to risk by really having a business plan. And you can be a family business, but it's still a business. There's still 2 + 2 = 4. And so I think I bring that. I've loved it in those 25 plus years that I've been here. I've had very few bad days.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for that background and the JNF. So got your background. So JNF, what is 127 years, right? That's a long time. You've been there for 25, as you mentioned, but what were some of the initial activities 127 years ago, if you have that history that JNF was participating in and supporting? I'd love to go through.
So I even like talking about it, especially because here we're on a podcast. We're going to be talking about, platforms and how we're going to download this and whether share it. You got to imagine 127 years ago, a man in his 30s, and I always bring that up, in his 30s, brought the Jewish world together to talk about reestablishing the ancestral land of Israel for the Jewish people after 2,000 years. Now, Joseph, you've got to understand, he didn't have a podcast. He didn't have Facebook or Instagram. For some of your people, they're going to understand the thing called a letter. You got to put it in an envelope, and you had to put a stamp on it.
And you have to write it by hand?
Write it by hand, and like 6 weeks to deliver, and the RSVPs didn't come. And he gathered a group of people to talk about a vision and a hope. And in that vision and hope, he said, look, we can sit around and talk all day or raise money, and let's repurchase acre by acre of land At that time, under Ottoman law, the Turks were in control of Palestine at the time, and they literally were buying acres of land from anybody who would sell it. And later, under the British mandate. And that was the origins of this organization. But I love telling it because they utilize different methodologies. Behind me is a blue box. It was a collector's box that they used to do. Today, we can think of it as coins. You have to think back then, it was major donations. You would take food off of your plate, put a coin in a box. Somebody like me would come around and collect it. I couldn't give you even a brochure. I had no Better Business Bureau, no navigation. It was hope. It was dreams. And this organization came about and brought you none other than the land of Israel that we have today, 75 years as a nation. And so for that time, it did a lot of things, which was developing the land. It wasn't just ownership. It was what are you to do? 260 million hand-planted trees. Israel, if you read Mark Twain in the 1800s, he traveled in Israel then. He wrote that, I don't know who God promised this land to, but they should ask for something else because it was devoid of any vegetation. It was nothing. And you have to imagine today from outer space, you can even tell the borders of Israel from the green from 280, million hand-planted trees that have been there. And so, like I said, I was able to come into this organization, take an old organization, and I always tell people, because they'll say legacy organizations are slow, they're not nimble, they can't move. And I was committed to this, was that if you're going to run a nonprofit, how do you have a legacy organization? Have it large. We have 600,000 donors. We have a lot of involved leadership. How do you maneuver? So we're not able to move as quick maybe as a smaller organization. But what you have is financial integrity. You have checks and balance. But can you get it to move and to set? So I always said you can if you have a vision. If you have projects, you're always going to be frustrated. If you have a vision and you've settled on what that vision is, so ours started out dealing with the water catastrophe that faced Israel. Then from that was a lot of projects. There then was taken the Negev desert, 60% of the land of Israel, 60, and only 4% of the population was living there. So we set a vision of bringing 500,000 people down to the desert. Well, there's a lot of projects that go with that, or in the north, and then we set a vision, a lot of projects. So we were able to maneuver our organization, make it nimble, make it happen, because we set objectives and allowed the projects to be the leads to making those objectives happen.
Well, so it started with the water catastrophe, and then a lot of land development. It sounds like when did the planting of the 26 million trees happen?
260 million. So I want to tell you, it was even by accident. So when they were repurchasing land from the Ottoman Empire at the time, from anybody would sell it, the law was either you had to settle on your land or grow on your land, or 7 years you would lose it. So the Eastern European Jews that were coming brought pine trees from Eastern Europe, not to grow forest, to hold on to the land, because pine trees take nothing. You don't have to really take care of pine trees. They thought, okay, we'll plant the pine trees, and when, because some areas were swamp infested, other areas nobody was living there. I mean, they weren't selling land that was the best land. They were selling land that they wanted to get rid of.
Yeah.
So, and then they discovered watershed management, environmental, and they said, you know what, this is something that we have to do. If we want to settle this land, we should grow forests. So forests came as an accident. Then you had Jews coming from, 900,000 Jews came to Israel within a 5-year period from Arab countries. And they didn't have the knowledge base. They usually were kept low level of education. So how do you employ people? You could give welfare, or you could put a truck with a bunch of saplings on it and send them up to a mountaintop and say, you get paid when those get planted. The amazing thing is that when you go to Israel, trees are in places that are in rocks and places you'd say, how did trees get growing there? It was from people that just wanted a paycheck and planted. And then trees took hold, and you had, a better climate and issue like that. So the 260 million trees, the great, I think, fundraising story was they decided how to raise money. They would sell certificates for planting a tree in Israel.
Mm.
Now, the certificates were social media at the time. There's a tree certificate. Every one of them had a beautiful picture on it, which was a story. So that was really a marketing technique. I instead of sending you a letter that a tree was planted in your honor, Joseph, I'd send you this beautiful visionary certificate. So you got to see this thing which told the story, but it also was a way to raise money. So instead of going to a chicken dinner, meal, they listened to a bunch of speakers. They came up with this methodology of selling trees that were being planted in Israel with certificates, which also was a great marketing campaign, which today 300,000 people still call in. You call 1-800-542-8733, and you could get a tree planted for somebody who passed away, somebody whose birthday, a bar bat mitzvah, a wedding. And so people could go again onto our site, jnf.org, plant a tree, and 300,000 people participate even today in this.
Wow.
It was a methodology that's sort of become an ideology.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So that sounds like that's a programming that you've sustained after the 260 million initial tree planting. What are some of the other main programmings that JNF is participating in now and focusing on currently? Not to the future yet, but currently. Yeah.
Yeah. So currently there's a war going on in Israel. And so we call it the Israel envelope. The people that are facing Gaza were evacuated. You should know, about 260,000 people that are out of their homes in Israel, that from the north to they're literally living in hotels, 4 or 5 people to a room, not for a month. This has been almost 5 months now. So these are our family members. These are people we worked with for years. So we're dealing with their initial evacuation, and we're dealing with their initial crisis, even providing 800 diapers to an area per week. When you send them to an area that didn't have the grocery stores and the places, food, opportunities, after school activities. And we're going to be bringing the people back home. We're even doing that as we speak. There's going to be 21,000 of those people moving back to that area. In the northern part of Israel, we were already reimagining what it was going to be. So we were building a culinary institute in the middle of nowhere up north, all the way by the Syrian-Lebanon border. Now, what are we doing? It's to change the narrative from a place that people want to leave to a place that people want to go to. It's going to be a place, when we think it through, how many tourists are going to come. The Culinary Institute is going to be one of the finest in the world. By the way, how do I say that? You got Cordon Bleu, you got CIA here. We're teaching 82 different nationalities that make up the people of Israel. So you want to learn French cooking, you can learn it. But you want to learn Tunisian cooking, or you want to learn Yemenite cooking, you want to learn Polish or Russian or Ethiopian or Bedouin or Druze, you come to our Culinary Institute, the GCI by JNF. Again, you go online and find out more about it. We're going to be opening up in the next 6 months. But we're also going to have a restaurant there and places where tourism can come. So you can learn to chop onions and dice at the finest Culinary Institute in the world, and learn how to cook from the spices of the world, because that makes up the people of Israel. We have a high school in Israel, an American high school in Israel. We take 1,600 16 and 17-year-olds per year to Israel that are going for a semester abroad experience. Whatever you're learning in your public school or your private school, you learn at our school. So we'll teach you AP calculus and your biology and your history. We emulate your academics. I always say that's for the parents. But you come in a semester abroad, you get to learn about 4,000 years of history where it was written, and you get a leadership development. What's the leadership development? You're away from home, and mom and dad aren't waking you up. You got to wake yourself up. So colleges are even looking at that, because, wow, this is your freshman year abroad, and you're only 16 or 17, and you find that those freshmen do much better because they've already had their, the freshman 15 or whatever they call it, when you go. So we have that American high school in Israel. So We have a diverse activities that are all about connecting people to the land and the beautiful stories about the people of Israel.
Oh, well, in preparing for this interview, I feel like one of the main topics that was on my top of mind that I talked about ahead of time was the increasing, like, almost forced polarization of what's going on because of the war that's happening there. So how is, like, when I asked this, the programming that was shared with me that JNF does is the agriculture education, for example. It's not necessarily specific to Israelis. It's open to anyone. So how are you at JNF kind of responding or trying to respond to the forced polarization that's happening sometimes
So
because of what's going on?
we're not just responding, we were doing it the day before.
Mm.
So even as we speak here, there's a group from Israel that is in Kenya that is working in villages, bringing food, security, water, energy solutions to this village in Kenya. Because you could take what Israel has learned in its course of developing the Negev, the desert. So you take small communities. Well, how did you grow in the middle of sand? You had to learn that, there's always a drop of rain somewhere. So how do you catch that drop of rain? Wastewater, I know it's not a great subject, but when we dealt with the water catastrophe, what we did is utilize reused water. People always say, well, populations will, you need a lot of water. Populations create water, wastewater. But,
Yeah.
Either you could dump it onto the land or the ocean and pollute, or you recycle it. And so you can learn how to recycle wastewater underground in vegetation and create water availability to villages in Africa. You could teach how you take seed and how you grow. And to be fair, there's a lot of United States have USAID, and sometimes they go into these African countries. But size and dimension is something that you have to deal with. When you're dealing in a small village, you're dealing with tribal mentality. Your family owned this piece of land, Joseph, from 18 generations. I own the land for 18. Don't tell me about tearing down my fence and building one big farm. That's the American system, and it works because we got a lot of property. But now what you get to teach them is, you know what? You'll grow green beans and I'll grow corn. I don't know if that's the two crops, and let's go to market together and let's utilize our water together. So you get to still keep your ancestral land from generations. And so we're teaching that throughout in the school that we have in Israel, not in response, something that we've been doing for 25 years. We've been bringing farm people, students, college students from Southeast Asia and Africa to come and get 22 college credit hours from their university in Vietnam. And guess what they get to learn? Agriculture. And they get to learn on how, by the way, I'm not talking about just how to put a seed in the ground. They're learning the business models, how to create it. Today, farming is a technology. You want to be able to measure the water. We could teach them not only about drip irrigation, which utilizes 50% less water, but there are certain technologies that you can even measure, not the soil, but the roots. Well, those are technologies in Israel. Why don't we bring them to places that need food? And if you look at great migrations around the world, what were they caused by? By droughts and food. And food security is the biggest issue facing. We're teaching that now in countries, some of them that don't even have, Micronesia doesn't have relationships with Israel, not in response for years. And students have been coming from Nepal and from Vietnam and Cambodia and from Nigeria and Kenya and coming to Israel, and for 9 months learning how to go back home and put food on their plate of their families because of a place called Israel that makes that world a better place. Now, those stories don't get told, but we have to keep telling the story. And I'm not one that thinks there's a divisive world, because I also see things optimistically. I will tell you that I'm getting people that were, there was a lot of Thai workers that were massacred on October the 7th. They were just there. These are workers that were taking home good salaries back to their homes. When they came to Israel for working for a year, they have to get paid by the way, have to get paid minimum wage. They get full health insurance during their time. It's not like you're an illegal immigrant to it. You're on a work visa. And those are the people that were also murdered. And if you talk to those people that have been there, they talk about the families that they knew and they were part of. So we could tell a great story. Sometimes the world doesn't want to tell that story. By the way, not just about Israel, about everything, because good news doesn't travel fast, bad news does. But the real story is that there is good and evil, and when good is doing good work, it brings great light to different nations. And there's people literally. You go to Vietnam and Cambodia, you go to Nepal, you go to Micronesia, you go to Kenya, and food is coming onto the plate of their families, and they're producing crops and they're producing solar and alternative energy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place called Israel.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think your comment it makes so much sense, and it's unfortunately the truth. Like I'm an optimist, you're an optimist as well, but good news doesn't travel as fast as bad news, which is such an unfortunate truth of our world. How do we find like truth in this, especially in this environment? Like, how do you figure out? And of course, you're on. I don't know how often you travel to Israel. I've been there once. It was a couple of years ago. But how do you sort through all of the bad news that's coming out from all sides of what's been happening, and how do you figure out what's your truth and what's the truth of the people that are being impacted and how do we come together instead of be separated by what's happening?
So I travel to Israel every month.
Yeah.
And so you got to come back with me one time. And anybody that wants to go. But we've been taking for years groups from college campuses, non-Jews. And by the way, we don't take them on a political trip. It's a Jewish National Fund trip as if they were going on a tour with another tour. Why do I say that? Because I don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
If I could take you through a walk through Jerusalem and you see Muslims, Christians, Jews, Armenian, everything walking down the street. By the way, you could see a Muslim doing prayer right there on the street, and then you'll see a Jew waiting for them because of the best friend. There's no propaganda there. It's just the reality. Go to a hospital in Israel, sit in the front lobby for an hour, for 5 minutes, and see everybody walking in, and nobody's seeing that whether you're a religious Jew or non-religious Jew, whether you're a religious Muslim or not a religious Muslim, you're coming in getting hospital care. We could take you to Akko, which is in the far north, and you want to walk through a city, talk about coexistence. I don't have to talk. Those speakers just walk through the beautiful alleys and the beautiful streets of there and see what's going on. Are there always issues? I don't know perfection anywhere. There's not perfection in my family. So I try to tell the story. We try this story. We take non-Jewish students from college campuses. We take non-Jewish professors on programs to Israel. They've written over 100 papers in robotics and music, not in political science and in history, because you know what? I always find those professors you're either for or against, and you already made up your mind. Bring a music professor from the United States to meet a music professor from Israel, and guess what they're talking about? Music. And it's not talking about politics. And I tell the people, don't keep trying to look for the issue. There's so many beautiful stories about everything. I don't define the United States by its political atmosphere. I define the United States by the Blue Ridge Mountains, by the Grand Canyon, by the beautiful people that exist. I could tell you about some terrible people, but my own family, but I'm going to tell you about the beautiful people in my family. So sometimes we all have to take that breath and say, how are we explaining our own family? Would we start off a conversation by saying, listen, you got to know about my Aunt Matilda. She ran over 3 people. No, you talk about my beautiful children, my beautiful family. You want to get to know me? There's a lot of warts that are in my family, but you know what? Get to know me and you'll find the beauties in my family.
Yeah.
And don't, if the people want to talk, there's no anti anybody. I'm pro everybody, because that's what the world has to be. And so follow the Jewish National Fund stories on Facebook and on Instagram, and follow me, Russell Robinson, on all of them, and you'll constantly see stories. We have over 200 volunteers going every week to Israel right now. These are people from all ages picking tangerines and picking fruit. Believe me, they don't do it at home. Painting buildings and being there and packing boxes, they don't do it at home, but they're there working and volunteering on their own dime because they want to be part of something bigger. And follow the stories. Go to our jnf.org and just follow the stories. And if you think they're propaganda, click on the people that we're talking about and then follow their stories. And what you'll find is that ours is not talking about the negatives and anybody else. We're just going to keep talking about who we are and what great work and how to make the world a better place. And I believe that the majority of people out there care about shared values and common destiny, and not about all this stuff that makes loud noises.
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing, I love your advice on too, because it's something I've always struggled with personal life and also like in the world with this global platform is with the examples you shared of similarly family members that are amazing people and others that maybe not. Like what responsibility have you and how has your sense of responsibility grown over time in the past, I don't know, 25, 50 years of should you have any responsibility towards that person in the family that, might not be as loving or as positive or, like you mentioned, is in jail or what have you, versus just focusing on the positives, because we only have so much time during the day and almost only so much mental space. So how has your sense of responsibility evolved over time in your current role and kind of in your life in general?
So it's a great question. I think that it's about business, it's about family, and they kind of come together in this way. You have a customer base in a business, and you want to keep that customer base, and you want to expand it, and you want to be good to those people that are coming into your place of business.
Yeah.
And you know what? I want all my family to come into my good space. And if they don't, you know what? At a certain point, I got to figure I have a certain amount of time during the day and a certain amount of energy. And there's so much good out there that either we could waste our time, I call it the oy vey, syndrome, sit around and oy vey, or decide that, here's a great member of the family and I can help build them up and they can help build me up, because I will get built as great as anything I've ever given. I can say that about people around me. I'm not going to circle myself with friendships that are going to pull me down. And you have those people, and that you try to give a little bit, but after a while, you got to finally look and say, how much time and energy do I want to have? And you will walk away from those friends. You'll walk away from that family, and it's sad. And maybe you can feel bad for them. I do know that I have a great circle of great people and more people that want to be around, and they want to be part of this greatness of what the world can be and the vision for tomorrow, that I don't have the energy, time, and effort or money to constantly go after those that I don't think are ever going to enter my store.
Right.
They're never going to come into my mall. They're never going to enter my life in a positive way. And I think it's a shame for them, because I do think that people like us who just have the optimistic outlook. It's not to have rose-colored glasses and not to see the world for what it is, of course, but get off the couch. Get off the couch. Don't sit and complain. Get into the game. And if you want to change the world, you don't like the environment. I love it when people say, environment. What are you doing about nothing? What about hunger? What are you doing? Nothing. Get off the couch and get in the game, because this is a great game. Change the world. Change one person. Help one thing. Make the world a little bit better there. Trust me, the world will be much better with everybody. This is not something you get to watch on TV. That was last night's game for the Super Bowl.
Yep.
Okay? This is a full. You got to be a participant on the field.
Yeah. Wow. I'd want to end the episode with that, but there's still one more topic I want to cover for JNF the future. What are your hopes for the next 1, 5, 10 plus years in your role
So our
for JNF?
fastest growing part of our donor demographic is our 22 to 40 year olds. We spend a lot of time making sure that young people are getting involved and engaged. It's a growing part of what we do. I believe that young people, listen, because of all of this, they're the most intelligent, involved, wise generation that will ever be around. They could travel the world by checking their phone. They can learn more than any other generation in the past. They travel more. They move more. Uh, you can move to suburbs and you can move everywhere because you can, and we're able to. And so we have to harness that. We have to understand the world is different. It's not my world; it's their world. And I think that for the future of the Jewish National Fund is that we constantly are thinking about how it's their world. I'll go back to customer. The customer is always right. You could choose not to have that person as a customer, but if you choose them, then find out what the customer is. You gotta, yeah, within the boundaries of who you are. But you know what? I will tell you, um, the Apple phone I think is 17 years old. 17 years old. And in those quick 17 years, you have all these platforms from podcasts to quick looks and Instagrams and whatever, all the TikToks and things that you can do.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's who it is. I don't have to tell people. They say, "Well, I wish they just wouldn't get their news from glancing." I said, "That's the news." Now, what we do have to do is provide them with the other alternative, which is the alternative to the news, what they're watching, which is the negatives, with the positives. And let's bring them involved. And I will tell you, we'll win the game. And that's the future of the Jewish National Fund, is that we have 127 years and we're looking at another 127 years of great leaders. Because every time you get a student that comes to our Must High School in Israel, I tell people, look, you want a return on investment? Wow, I got 70 more years, give or take, right? So I take a 17-year-old life expectancy, 70 years. That's pretty good ROI. Let's keep investing in that ROI.
Yep. Wow. Well, Russell, is there anything you want to leave us with before we wrap up? But really appreciate your time and looking forward to share the work that you're doing with JNF and the impact that you're having.
So again, go to jnf.org for anybody, jnf.org. It's Russell Robinson on my Instagram or Facebook or all the other platforms that I'm on. And I answer, I'm on LinkedIn and so on. Please join. And if you want to order a tree, 1-800-542-8733, 800-542-8733, and order a tree for yourself, or a tree in memory of, in honor of, and somebody's birthday. It's very easy, and then get into the game and engage.
Oh, well, thanks again, Russell. Really appreciate your time and looking forward to sharing all the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.